What do you think it might be like to be a general of the Army and then become President of the United States? There are very few men who have done it, but I am one of them. I was born Hiram Ulysses Grant on April 27, 1822, at Point Pleasant, Ohio. My father, Jesse, had become wealthy as a leather tanner. My mother, Hannah, a quiet, unemotional woman, offered little affection in the home. People assume that the S in my name stood for Simpson, my mother's maiden name, though it was simply a letter with no further meaning. I was the eldest of 6 children. I was a shy, sensitive person who loved animals. I disliked the tannery Father ran. I discovered my love of horses when I was just 3, when I rode the first time. By age 5, I was able to stand on a horse's back as it trotted. When I was 9, I purchased my first horse. My understanding of horses while I was still a child was soon well recognized. People from all over town brought me horses to train. When I wasn't training horses, I loved to race them. It was not uncommon for me to be seen racing other boys along the roads. When it came to doing schoolwork, I guess you could say I was fairly bright. I enjoyed math, but disliked writing. I especially hated having to speak in front of others. This dislike continued into my adult years. I was also artistic and painted several watercolor paintings from what I saw in life. Perhaps one of the hardest things I had to endure was my father's bragging. Jesse Grant loved to brag about his oldest son. He bragged so much that the other boys resented me. It became the point which split the two of us apart. I didn't seem to have any real talents except for handling horses, and I hated the tannery. Father thought I might do well as an engineer and sent me to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. I graduated after 4 lonely years at the academy in 1843. I didn't have many friends. I accepted an Army commission as a brevet second lieutenant on graduation. My posting to St. Louis was fine with me. Just about anything was an improvement over returning to the tannery. One of my few friends at West Point was Fred Dent from St. Louis. I made it a point to go by the Dent farm to pay my respects when I arrived in town. There I met Fred's sister Julia. It was love at first sight. Julia Dent was not a pretty young woman. She was frequently described as plain and cross-eyed. In spite of that, she had a loving and vibrant personality, which was what I most desired. Although I was considered a very handsome young soldier with a wealthy father, Julia Dent's father was not in favor of the match. He was a slave owner, and Father was an abolitionist. In 1846, I went to fight in the Spanish-American War. The separation from my sweetheart was especially difficult for me to deal with. During this war, I began to drink as a way to escape my loneliness. I did not tolerate the drink well, and only a small amount was necessary to make me drunk. Even so, I was able to continue in my job well. I never let alcohol interfere with my work, and I would encourage any intelligent man to stay away from the stuff. After the war, I returned to Missouri and married Julia Dent. We moved to my new posting in Detroit in 1849. The city was not as we know it today, but more like a town in the Wild West. Julia and I did a lot of socializing with other young officers, and I enjoyed the parties. One thing I refused to do was dance. I was too shy. Julia was such an emotional support for me that I almost never drank when she was around. She completely filled the void that remained from my emotionally starved childhood. After being stationed in Detroit, I was moved to Sackett's Harbor, New York. I enjoyed being in the Army, but I also found it boring. Then in 1852, I was ordered to go to Humboldt Bay, California. Julia was pregnant with our second child and was unable to go with me as she would normally do. The next 2 years were the bleakest of my life. I was separated from my wife and child while serving under a commanding officer who didn't like me. I turned to alcohol once again. After 2 years, I could no longer take it and resigned my commission to go home to my family. After resigning my commission, my family and I moved to a farm adjoining the Dent farm in St. Louis. I spent the next 4 years working as a farmer but made little money. I had no head for business, but I had a very generous nature. Then I tried managing real estate, but didn't like to collect rents. Finally, in 1860, I moved the family to Galena, Illinois, where I worked in Father's leather shop. In June 1861, I rejoined the U.S. Army as a colonel of the Illinois Infantry. A month later, I was promoted to brigadier general. My first battle as a general was 3 months later. My horse was shot out from under me, and we lost the battle. In spite of that, I considered it to be good fighting experience for my men. My Tennessee win at Fort Donelson in February 1862 was an important strategic victory. Other generals who were jealous over my success started spreading unfounded rumors that I was drinking again. In April, Sherman and I engaged the Confederates at the Battle of Shiloh. My resistance to giving up helped the Union to win on the second day of battle. Over the next year, my forces pushed south. I was determined to split the Confederate Army apart into east and west groups. To do this, I needed control of the Mississippi River. The city of Vicksburg was all that stood between me and my goal. I finally defeated the city by laying siege to it. It was one of my greatest moments. That summer, I was injured in a riding accident. I was unable to walk for weeks and spent the time resting with my family near Vicksburg. I was finally back in action in October when I took up my command again in Tennessee. All these victories there brought my name before President Lincoln. By March 1864, I was promoted and then put in charge of all the Union armies by Lincoln. The Union Army had been plagued with generals who were poor leaders. Lincoln said I was a real fighter and wanted me to lead the Union forces. That May, Lee's forces met mine for the first time. They each continued to seek the advantage until Confederate forces were so worn down they could not fight effectively. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered. I offered generous terms to Lee and his men. I allowed them to keep their horses and weapons. I ordered my men to treat the Confederates well and encouraged the men to go back home. The war is over. The rebels are again our countrymen, and the best sign of rejoining is to abstain from all demonstrations in the field. After the war, I addressed the problem I had with alcohol. I was unable to take a single drink and stop. My enemies would point out the problems I had with the drink. I made the choice to stop drinking altogether in 1865.